Last summer was hot. That seems rather like saying that water makes things wet if you take a moment to think about that statement. Don't worry though, hot weather nowadays means the sky is falling. Or something. Hello everyone. This is episode 1 on my new channel, The Real Stephen Britton. If I come up with a better name later, I'll change it. But for now, this is the best I've got. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about an episode of Tinfoil Tuesday by Sci-Man Dan back from August of 2023. In that episode, Dan tries to debunk a commentary produced by Matt Walsh for the Daily Wire. All reference documents and videos are in the description below. Last July, Ilhan Omar posted this little missive over on X. The Earth just broke the record for the hottest day in 120,000 years. In fact, we broke it on 3 separate days. National Climate Emergency now. 120,000 years. That's a long time indeed. I did some digging into this statement and, spoiler alert, it isn't what she says it is. In any case, Daily Wire personality Matt Walsh released a video debunking her tweet and associated claims. Then Sci-Man Dan jumped on the bandwagon and released a video of his own debunking Matt Walsh's video. So today, I'm going to debunk Sci-Man Dan. This means today we have a third order debunk, a debunking of a debunking of a debunking of a claim. I want to start with a bit of a disclaimer here. I subscribe to Sci-Man Dan. I like a lot of his content, and he gets the vast majority of what he says absolutely correct. On this, however, he misses the mark, and I'll show you why. So, with all that out of the way, let's start with what Sci-Man Dan had to say with respect to Ilhan Omar's tweet.
This is an absolutely correct statement, as we're about to find out.
Oh, is it? Let's have a closer look. Dan is going to refer to this graph a bit later on, and this is a perfectly reasonable graph to use. But I wanted to have a bit more flexibility, so I found an interactive one powered by the 2 Degrees Institute. Now, according to this graph, 120,000 years ago, the average global temperature anomaly was positive 1.81 degrees Celsius. Now, the temperature anomaly is a baseline. The institution that's creating it, they work out the average over a number of years of fairly stable temperatures, and they use that as their point that's 0. So 1.81 degrees above current normal means that they're 1.8 degrees above their average baseline, whatever that baseline happens to be. Now, for our purposes, provided we use a consistent and decent baseline, it doesn't actually matter what this value is, 1.81 above whatever it is. Now, different organizations may use slightly different baselines, of course, but again, as long as we use the baseline associated with every graph that we're looking at, it doesn't matter, and our results for comparison will be valid. Let's look at the average temperature for July of 2023. 1.18 above that same baseline. This means Ilhan's claim was completely wrong to begin with. Now, with that out of the way, let's put that statement aside for now, and we'll continue on with Matt's response to Ilhan.
But before you go building your ark in preparation for the coming worldwide floods from the polar ice caps melting and all the rest of it, you should take some solace in the fact that what Ilhan Omar has claimed here is total, absolute nonsense.
We just saw that, didn't we? But we're going to keep going here because there's so much more wrong with her claim.
We do not have daily temperature records dating back 120,000 years, okay? So you can't say it's the hottest day in 120,000 years because that would require you to know how hot it has been every day for the last 120,000 years, and you don't know that. Nobody does.
And he's right. We can infer the global temperature going back that far, but we don't have the ability to conclusively declare that any single day is the hottest day in 120,000 years. It doesn't work like that.
That is a bit pedantic, but what we do know is the absolute high points. Now this is a graph of the average temperature for the last 800,000 years or so. And you can see here, in the last 120,000 years, the average was nowhere near today's average. So we can quite confidently say it most likely was the hottest day, especially with the very accurate records we've had over the last 200 years.
I'll grant that the records have been very accurate over the last 200 years. I'll even grant that we can determine the average temperature for the last million years or so using ice core samples and such. First, as we've seen, it was actually warmer 120,000 years ago than it is today. And second, the information we can derive from that far back in history is useless for making a day-to-day comparison. More on that in a moment.
In fact, we can't get anywhere close to that in terms of our records. And that's why it's not possible to go and look and find out what the weather was like on, say, I don't know, August 7th in the year 4000 BC, much less the year 40,000 BC. That information does not exist. We have no idea. It was not recorded.
It wasn't, no, but the average was. And that is what Ilhan Omar was talking about, the average. July 3rd to 4th's average global temperature was 17.18 degrees Celsius. That was a record.
Whoa, guys. That's got to go. Seriously, that's got to go. We're not doing that again. Too loud, too much, just terrible. But they're accurate. It's a straw man argument. Dan replaced Matt's point with a different, easier to defeat argument and then defeated it. We know it's an average. It's just not useful. And here's why. Let's have a look at a graph of close to 800,000 years of global temperature records, which is again powered by the 2 Degrees Institute. This graph is very similar to the one that we just saw from Simon and Dan. While it's likely that whatever temperature anomaly they were using might be different, the data remains the same. The data points are derived from proxy sources like tree rings and ice core samples. Here's a photograph of an ice core sample depicting 11 years of information. This sample is 19 centimeters long, and it was taken from 1855, 1,855 meters deep. Each of these arrows here represents a point in a layer which is lighter in color. This represents the summer. Using this and similar ice core samples giving you the same years over different points of the world, could you work out the average global temperature for July 17th during any one of those years? No, you can't, because you don't have nearly enough information from these ice core samples to do that. All you can do at absolute best is infer an average annual global temperature. Even when you're comparing average global temperatures, taking a daily average and comparing it to an annual average is completely useless. And that's Dan's straw man. By defeating the straw man instead of Matt's actual argument, Dan is trying to convince you that Matt is wrong. You're better than that, Dan. Coming back to Matt, he then refers to an article from The Hill from July the 8th, which is likely the source of Ilhan Omar's ridiculous tweet. This article is more accurate than Ilhan's tweet, so let's hear Matt's read from it.
Since at the peak of the last ice age, Earth's average temperature is about 10 degrees cooler than today, and it's not been this warm since the last ice age, we call that time the last interglacial, in between glacial periods, which peaked around 125,000 years ago.
Which is precisely what this graph here shows. And you can see the peaks in history. The alarming thing, of course, is that the current peak threatens to go higher.
And nobody is denying that, Dan. The debate isn't over whether global warming is real or not. The debate is over the cause of global warming and what, if anything, we can or should do about it.
That's the science. Using proxy data like tree rings and ocean sediments, scientists can come up with a guess as to the average global temperature dating back thousands of years, supposedly.
Which is precisely what I just said.
Indeed, it was the average global temperature of today that we were comparing it to. Now, it's very interesting to note that Matt didn't show this graph from that report. Does this sharp line here look like a natural curve on the graph to you, Matt? Something that would happen if humans weren't here? No. No, it doesn't.
Guys, what did I tell you? What did I tell you? That's got to go. All right. I'll need some aspirin after this. Let's talk about the graph that Simon Dan just referenced. He's correct in that it doesn't look at all like something that would happen if humans weren't here. It doesn't look like something that would happen as a result of human activity either. That's because the line goes straight up. The global temperature, average or otherwise, can never go straight up like that. This graph is nothing more than a marketing tool to peddle climate alarmism. It's propaganda.
Even if these guesses are correct or approximately correct, and that's a big if, okay, they are averages. They are not precise daily measurements.
Now, this is a classic example of Matt thinking in 2D, just like a flat earther. Now, he thinks we're trying to compare really hot days with really hot days. He's seen that it's been really hot recently, and he thinks that we're saying, right, well, it's been 56 degrees today. What temperature was it in mid-July, 123,000 BC? Such a flat earth move, Matt. As I said before, we are comparing the averages.
Wow. Just wow. You can do better than that, Dan. Comparing Matt to a flat earther because he was responding to Ilhan Omar's original tweet saying that we had the hottest day in 120,000 years. Ilhan Omar was comparing really hot days to really hot days. Nobody has suggested that the original sources of information were doing that. Matt is specifically referring to Ilhan Omar's insane statement. But we don't want to get that in the way of a good ad hominem, do we, Dan? This, however, is the problem with the global warming debate. It isn't a scientific debate, it's a political debate, and it has always been that way. It's been framed as the biggest crisis ever. Here in Canada, there are a set of government commercials floating around that refer to global warming as the climate crisis. Canada's food and heating costs have skyrocketed due to the carbon tax, which is a punitive tax on pretty much everything. And there is not one scrap of evidence to suggest that there has been any impact on Canada's greenhouse gas emissions because of it. In reality, most of these so-called climate crisis solutions involve moving money around, and moving money around won't solve a thing. We still need to eat. We still need to get to work. And even when we elect to purchase electric vehicles, we still need to get electricity to power them from somewhere. And then we have to store that electricity somehow. Have you seen a lithium mine? They wreak havoc on the environment, potentially poisoning the groundwater and the soil for years to come. How about wind turbines? Or to use a more appropriate term, bird blenders. They're incredibly efficient for power generation. They kill birds, or at the very least, they have a negative impact on wildlife habitat. They're made of fiberglass, resin, and plastic. And where do you get plastic from? Petroleum products. Bird blenders also ruin the view. And since they take energy out of the wind in order to make them turn, if you put up enough turbines, you end up changing the weather patterns, which means climate change. Perhaps solar power is the answer. Again, there's the problem of efficiency. Solar panels only work when the sun is shining. If there's a dust storm or a heavy snowfall, they'll need to be cleaned off. They also literally produce a massive amount of toxic waste in the manufacturing process. One of the nastiest byproducts of solar panels is something called silicon tetrachloride, which can burn your skin if you touch it, cause lung disease if you inhale it, and it will produce hydrochloric acid if you get it in water. The recycling cost of solar panels is so ridiculously high that they're not really worth the cost. Now, you need to understand here that I'm not arguing against any of these measures for storing or generating power. I'm trying to get across to you the point that the global warming debate is about a lot more than, oh boy, it's getting hot outside. It's a political argument, and I have yet to see one climate advocate advance an argument that won't lead to higher costs, potential environmental damage, and massive harm to vulnerable people all over the world. Even when a nation does successfully reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, the impact on the global climate is going to be minimal at best. Now, this graph here shows the annual greenhouse emissions from the top 5 countries, and I added in the UK and Canada. And I added those two because those 2 countries are where Simon, Dan, and I live, respectively. You can display the emissions on a pie chart like this, as I've done here. Now, clearly the largest emitter is China, with just over 29%. The next is the US, with 11%. India is at 7.3%. Russia's at 4.7%, and Brazil is the last of the top 5 at just below 2.5%. Canada is ranked 12th with 1.4%, and the UK produced just under 0.8%. How much impact do you think Canada or the UK would have on global warming if they continue to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions? Maybe even cut them down to zero? The answer to that question is actually pretty simple. Almost nothing. Because when you consider the fact that China's emissions have increased year after year, so China is going to continue to pollute the world while the governments of Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, they're bringing about economic ruin and putting up the price of food and everything to accomplish almost nothing. And that's just plain dumb. You see, the debate, as I just said, at this point, isn't about the science. It's a political debate. Simon Dan, clearly he has his opinions on the subject, and he's perfectly entitled to his opinions. Now the same goes for you and for me. But let's move away from the ad hominem. Let's move away from the straw man. Let's move away from the alarmism, and let's start talking about how to deal with this effectively. Let's deal with the cause. Let's deal with potential true solutions. And I'll give you this for free. Taxing people to death for the crime of heating their homes during the winter, forcing up the prices of basic necessities like food, and getting people to spend money on green vehicles and other green technologies, which when you look at it isn't nearly as green as you're being led to believe. None of that is a solution. I'm Stephen Britton. Thanks for watching.